Hi, I'm Nick. Every year I go up to New Hampshire's White Mountains to complete a one-day presidential traverse. It's a great challenge. It's every bit rewarding as it is soul-crushing. I'm not a professional hiker. I don't even know if that's a thing. But I hope I can help those of you who are thinking about doing this for the first time. Before we begin, let's define what exactly it is we're doing. A presidential traverse is a hike that requires you to cross all the peaks that are named after US presidents. Now, keep in mind, there's no trail called a presidential traverse. It's just the name of an achievement you can accomplish. It's up to you to plan out your hike ahead of time. Now, this can be confusing because not all the peaks are named after presidents and not all the peaks are in fact peaks. For example, some maps may label Mount Clay, named after Henry Clay. This is not technically a peak because it doesn't even rise above the shoulder of Washington. It's only considered a minor summit of Washington. And Henry Clay was never a president. Sure, he ran for the presidency 3 times, but he was defeated every time. The second time by Andrew Jackson. Now, Mount Jackson is a proper peak, but it's not named after Andrew Jackson. It's named after Charles Thomas Jackson, a 19th century geologist. And Mount Webster is named after the Senator Daniel Webster, who also ran for the presidency 3 times, but never got it. And then there's Adams. It's the second highest peak named after the second president, John Adams. This peak has 2 sub-peaks, also named Adams. One named after his cousin, Samuel Adams, and the other after his son, John Quincy Adams, who, as you might know, went on to become the 6th president. But almost nobody includes him in their traverse because almost nobody knows about it. It's not a proper peak, there's no sign to label it, and there's no trail to take you to it. Oh, by the way, this peak also has 2 sub-peaks also named Adams, I'm not kidding. One named after John's wife, Abigail Adams, and the other just called Adams 5. I don't even know who that's named after. So let's just concentrate on the proper presidential peaks. In this video, I'll be hiking from north to south, and I'll be crossing Madison, Adams, Jefferson, Washington, Monroe, Eisenhower, and Pierce. So how do you prepare for something like this? Well, it's a very strenuous hike. It's over 20 miles long, 9,000 feet of elevation gain, and book time says it'll take you 14 to 16 hours. If you've never hiked for that long before, then you need to do that before you go up there. Nothing can quite prepare you for that world-famous wind and weather above the tree line, but you can condition your legs to last the hike. And speaking of the weather, you do need to pack long sleeves and pants. The forecast is meaningless. It can start off as 85 and sunny, but conditions change very fast up there. I've needed my long sleeves on every traverse. Don't be this guy. Our adventure starts in a small parking lot called Appalachia on Route 2. You saw me pull up at the beginning of the video. Get here as early as possible. Some people start hiking before dawn using headlamps. The first trail you'll take is called Valley Way. I'm not gonna lie, Valley Way is tough because it's a steady uphill climb with no views. It's early, it's cold, you're tired, and you're hungry. Just keep telling yourself, this was a good idea. About 2 miles in, you'll see a sign for Watson Path. I highly recommend you take this trail. Although it's very steep and harder than Valley Way, it takes you right to the summit, then down to the Madison Hut. If you were to stay on Valley Way, you'd arrive at the hut first, and then you'd have to hike an out and back to the summit, a half mile each way. before you know it, you'll have broken the tree line and you can stop telling yourself that this was a good idea because you can clearly see it was. Take a minute to kick your feet up above the clouds, snap a few pictures, then get up and get to that summit.
Well, here we are at the first peak, and keep in mind, just from Appalachia Route 2 to the Madison Hut is 4 miles. It's 1,000 feet of elevation gain per mile, and book time says it takes about 4 hours. So if you made it to the peak of Madison in less than 4 hours, you're doing pretty good. We can see over here, we have our first glimpse of Washington. But before we go there, our next destination is to the right. We're going to Adams.
Make your way down to the Madison Hut. If the weather's rough, head inside for a short break. Keep in mind this will be the last shelter you'll see in a long time. From here, there are 2 ways to get to Adams, equal in length. There's the popular Gulfside Trail, which offers a relatively smooth climb to the summit, but if you're feeling good, take Star Lake Trail. This will give you the best views of Mount Washington and the Great Gulf Wilderness. Not to mention, the lake that the trail is named after is beautiful. I'm not going to go over every detail of the traverse. Star Lake is just one of the many overlooked gems you'll come across in your hike. No matter which trail you choose, Adams is a son of a bitch. The terrain is among the worst you'll find all day. In fact, on my seldom used Star Lake Trail, the path just disappears a couple hundred feet before the summit. You'll have to climb hands and feet over boulders from marker to marker, a la Super Aggro Crag.
And here's the view from Adams. Peak number 2 in our traverse. You can see where we came from. There's Madison. And way down there on Route 2 is where we started. Our next peak is Jefferson. And then the long haul up to Washington.
You know, looking back on this video, Jefferson doesn't seem that far away, but trust me, it is. These 2 pictures were taken 20 minutes apart, and there's not much of a difference. To make matters worse, much of the trail is like this. You can't run this, even if you're feeling up to it. Many of these rocks are loose, and you don't know which ones until you step on them and they roll over on you, which is exactly what happened to me. The good news is the views of the Great Gulf are incredible. There are many spots to stop and take in some of the best vistas of the hike. The summit of Jefferson gives us our first western views, which includes the impressive Mount Washington Hotel and Cog Railway. As you can tell, it also gave us company. We're going to see a lot more foot traffic on the next 3 peaks because they make suitable day hikes from the major hotels in the area. As always, use good etiquette while passing. Hopefully you'll be shown the same. You might also want to play my favorite game, Count the LL Beans. So the hike to Jefferson was very long. Well, the hike to Washington is even longer. In fact, this is the longest stretch between peaks. Both physical and mental trail fatigue can set in here. For me, this is where a podcast or an audiobook can save the day. If you want to add clay to your traverse, then go ahead. The loop is about the same distance you travel if you were to stay on Gulfside. It just adds some elevation gain. Soon after the clay loop, you'll meet up with the Cog Railway. This is the world's first mountain climbing rack and pinion railway. It's been in operation since 1868. Yeah, that's just 3 years after the Civil War. We can start to see some of the towers on top of Washington, even though they're still over 2 miles away. Because the summit is always within view, I always think these are the longest miles of the hike. You'll know you're getting close when the path actually requires you to cross the cog tracks, although I'm sure you're not supposed to do this. After that, it's just a few more minutes until you reach Mount Washington summit, or as I like to call it, the circus. Believe it or not, for me and a lot of other hikers, Mount Washington is the low point in the hike. Don't get me wrong, the views are amazing, but it's very crowded, and there's something about large groups of vacationers that seems to bring out the worst in people. I've personally seen strangers almost come to blows over line position in front of the summit sign, and I've even seen an adult throw a hot dog wrapper in the air just to see how far the wind will carry it down the ravine. Yeah, I usually can't wait to get back on the trail. While we're here, let's talk about bailing strategies. If your body's telling you that you cannot do the rest of the hike, or you're many hours behind book time, then don't worry, because you have options. You can hike down Tuckerman's Ravine Trail to the Pinkham Notch Center. You can take a very convenient but pricey AMC shuttle. Or, worst case scenario, hitch a ride. Most people get up there by driving, and despite what I just said about them, I'm sure somebody will help you out. From here, we only need to follow one trail that'll eventually take us all the way to the finish. Crawford Path. This is the oldest continuously used hiking trail in the country, and some parts still feel barren and raw, which gives you an experience similar to adventure seekers almost 200 years ago. But before we get to those parts, we need to get past the next hut. The Lakes of the Clouds hut is by far the most popular shelter. It's usually booked solid months in advance, and overnight rates can balloon to over $120 for a cot. Part of the reason I do one-day traverses is because I don't think I can afford to do a two-day traverse. The lakes themselves are gorgeous. It's incredible to see any water up here. These lakes, or let's be honest, ponds, help form the Ammonoosuc River, which flows into the Connecticut River. It's amazing to think that the water in this remote location will eventually flow by my house in Western Mass. Make your way past the hut and the state-of-the-art weather equipment and head up the path to the Monroe summit. The last 3 peaks are much easier than the first 4. The climb up Monroe can be done in under 10 minutes. After that, the path transforms into a trail runner's paradise. It rides the very top of the mountain range, giving you 360-degree views, and the soft dirt and sand feel great under sore feet. My pictures and videos don't do it justice. On a clear day, it has to be one of the best trail runs in New England. As you can probably tell, this is my favorite part of the traverse. And because of that, well, I'm sorry to say, I don't have much footage of the rest of the hike. I'm usually having too much fun to stop and take pictures or videos every 10 minutes, so I apologize. The rest of the hike might not get the attention it deserves. On our way to Eisenhower, we have the option of adding another peak. Mount Franklin, named after Benjamin Franklin, is a very short loop that sneaks up on you. In fact, I've taken it by accident and didn't even realize it. Twice. This is only considered a secondary peak of Monroe, and of course I hope you know BF was never a president, so don't feel bad if you pass it by. To me, the climb up Eisenhower is deceptively long. It's nowhere near as tall or as steep as the first few peaks, but the path winds back and forth up the side of the mountain at a steady incline. It's like the world's longest handicap ramp, with boulders and roots and things. So right now we're on top of Pierce. Yes, Pierce. Eisenhower is right there behind me. I got talking to someone at the summit and I forgot to take footage. But it just so happens that that person is here now.
Hey, yeah, so I can confirm that Nick the Mountain Goat ran right up it like the first one of the day almost.
See, that'll hold up in a court of law. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Here's your $20. Yeah, I told you I don't have much footage. Anyway, let's back up. The summit of Eisenhower is pleasantly smooth and rounded, kind of like the E-Man himself. In good weather, this makes it an ideal place for hikers to take a break. In fact, this is where I met my trail running friend, Blair? Sorry, buddy, I'm a terrible friend. Let's get to our last peak. Most of the trail from Eisenhower to Pierce is actually below the tree line. If it's a hot, dry day, this can be refreshing, but if you're hiking in the spring or after a day of rain, the path is easily flooded, and that can really slow you down on these last few hours of the hike. To get to Pierce, we have to temporarily hop off of Crawford Path and onto the Webster Cliff Trail. Technically, this is an out and back, but it's a very short one, 1/10 of a mile short. This is the only summit below the tree line, which means you might not even notice when you cross it. Keep an eye out for a small marker in a rock. yeah, that's all they give you. Webster Cliff Trail would take you across the 2 extra credit peaks, Jackson and Webster, but if this is your first traverse, you're probably thinking, 7's enough. Why don't you just turn around and get back on Crawford Path? With all the presidents under your boot, make your way down to the finish on Route 302. Now, this is no short cool down, it's 3.2 miles of downhill trail. Even though you're probably exhausted and your legs are numb, do your best to support your weight with every step. If you start lazily landing flat-footed, you will regret it in the future. Good downhill technique is the difference between being sore for a day and being sore for a week. When you reach the road, you'll end up across the street from the AMC Highland Center. There are many Adirondack chairs out front for you to crash into and pass out while you wait for your ride. And that's how I do a presidential traverse. Now, keep in mind, doing this in one day is a challenge, and it should be treated like a challenge. If you actually want to enjoy the hike, or if you're hiking with a group of people, then by all means, take 2 days. It will be much more enjoyable. If you want to be a one-day hero, all I can say is get familiar with book time and practice beating it. If you limit your breaks and go at a good pace, you can beat it. Like I said before, it takes 14 to 16 hours book time, but my personal slowest was around 12 hours. And this was hiking with another person. My fastest time was just under 8 hours, so it can vary greatly depending on how much you're willing to push yourself. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful in some way. And I hope you enjoyed the music. It's an original of mine, and if you want to hear more, or give me money for it, I'll include links down below. Now get off YouTube and get on the trail.